Welcome to Under the Microscope. I am your host, Jenny Germano. Thank you for joining me today. I am really excited for today's episode. We're going to be talking about the hidden hazards of cannabis operations and then how to prevent them. So, we're going to be diving into a topic that I am passionate about. A little bit about my background. I got my start working in the cannabis industry in 2009 in Denver, Colorado, running and operating vertically integrated cannabis operations. And in 2015, I founded my company, ICS Consulting, and I help people get open and launch their businesses across the United States. So, a lot of work with operational readiness, but also a little bit about the worker safety background for myself and why I am passionate about it. I was an employee in the cannabis industry and worked in the hospitality for 23 years. I think worker safety in general is really important. And once I became an owner of a cannabis business, I decided that this was something I wanted to help operators to educate them more on the worker safety side. And I started getting involved with OSHA and taking classes. I got certifications around general industry for 10-hour and 30-hour just to educate myself so I could support clients better. Let's give a warm welcome to a returning guest and friend of mine, colleague, Alex Herding. Hey, Alex, thanks for
Hey,
joining me today.
Jenny. No, you're welcome. Excited to talk to you about worker safety.
Alex and I are really going to nerd out on this. We're actually
Yeah.
having a little fun before we start recording the podcast, probably a little too much fun. And we're a little amped up and really happy to be talking about this topic. Alex and I, probably known each other about 10 years, and we work on projects together regarding worker safety and all kinds of things. Alex, why don't you go ahead and give our listeners a little bit about your background in worker safety and why you became passionate about worker safety?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jenny, for having me. Always a pleasure to talk with you and excited to get into this. Yeah. Background for me, worker safety, actually, right out of college. My education was in science and engineering, and I worked on a lot of hazardous waste sites and mining waste sites. And I had to get OSHA certified. I had to get what's called HAZWOPER, which is hazardous waste operations and emergency response. OSHA has a lot of cool acronyms like that. But yeah, so I was HAZWOPER certified for about 20 years, meaning I could go on really hazardous, dangerous sites. I've worked with OSHA. I got a lot of OSHA education. Out of college, I was a field engineer for a really big engineering company, and I was their jack of all trades. So I was on the field, I was their safety guy as well. And so I learned a lot about construction safety there, and I worked directly with OSHA for a long time on some big projects, making sure the workers were safe. And then when the green rush came around, I was obviously involved. And when I ended up building and operating cultivation facility up in Leadville, one of the first things I realized in the operations is the lack of standards. And from my
Yeah.
point of view, it was the lack of OSHA standards because most every other industry you have out there has a standard safety program that you need to have to meet those federal standards. One of the first things I did after leaving that operation, that cultivation, was to develop a comprehensive worker safety program for this industry. And I actually worked with OSHA and another company to develop the first OSHA approved general industry 10-hour training for cannabis workers that's offered through Red Rocks Community College. So I've been in the thick of it for a long time. I care about the workers too, and it has some unique hazards in this
Yeah.
industry. And so this subject means a lot to me.
Yeah, and I actually took that course at Red Rocks College.
That's right.
It was a long time ago. I think it was definitely before COVID. It might have been 2019. I can't remember. It was right when you guys launched that course.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
was a great course. It was like in person at Red Rocks Community College here in Colorado. I am a big fan of being an advocate for employees because a lot of people are advocates for patients and all these other things, which is great, but I'm always trying to fight to make sure employees are getting the proper training and education and that they have resources available to them, and as well as helping the operators and making sure they understand and they have resources. And I think this is going to be a really good piece for whether you're an employee or an existing operator, or you're a new operator in an emerging market, or you're thinking about getting into this industry. And this kind of information, I think, will be important for people who might not fully understand it, or maybe they didn't even realize how much that some of these things actually they're required as an employer to do. With diving in, one of the things I wanted to bring up first, right out of the gate, is to talk about the duty clause.
Mm,
And we're going to test your
all
knowledge.
right.
This is what we were having a good time laughing about,
Let's see if I
to
remember.
see if Alex remembers the entire duty clause. I have it pulled up on my screen. I'll help him out if he needs
Yeah.
it.
Yes, yes.
But just share with people about this duty
Yeah.
clause.
So, yes, it's the general duty clause of the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. And this is the clause that really covers really most of OSHA's authority. And it says an employer shall furnish a workplace that is free of hazards that are known to cause serious injury or death. How close am I on to that?
You got it.
Well,
Serious physical harm.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, but same or serious physical harm to their employees.
Yeah.
Uh, but then there's like a section for employees as well in that
Oh god.
clause.
Oh gosh, I should know this. Should
Ooh.
know this. Ooh gosh, now you're really putting me on the spot.
I
I'm definitely going to paraphrase this one because I'm not going to. But to my knowledge, employees have to understand what the standards are, the rules that are proclamated. Or that's a difficult one under the OSHA Act, or the
yeah.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
you nailed it. It is true that the employee shall comply with these OSHA standards, basically, is what they're saying. And so both
Yep.
parties are responsible. The owner of a business is responsible
Yep.
for making sure they understand what they're supposed to do regarding having a safe workplace. But then once they share that information with the workforce or the employees, it is that employee's responsibility to follow the workplace safety.
Yeah. It
That's
is.
how
No,
I
it's
understand it.
absolutely. And when I set up a safety program for a business, everybody needs to understand they have a role and responsibility and accountability. And one of the things that's not required but strongly recommended is just to have a safety policy for your business. And that policy, it should outline what's the responsibility of the owners and what's the responsibility of the employees. And essentially, it's what that general duty clause is, right? The employer's job is to understand the hazards, to do what within their power to control those hazards and prevent employees getting injured. And then it's the employee's job to also review and to understand the rules, understand the program, the safety program and plans, and to also speak up. One of the big things of any safety program is that communication
Yeah.
from the employer to the employee and vice versa, right? And there really needs to be an openness. One of the biggest things, and there are rules against this, is there's non-retaliation rules, right?
Yeah.
So it's illegal for employers to punish anybody for speaking up for any safety issues. If an employee says, I don't understand what this plan is, or why should I have to wear these PPE or whatever the question is, there can be no repercussion for that. There has to be a trust there. And that's the real central piece to these safety programs that work. That's the real quality essence culture behind the safety programs that matter even more than the words on the paper that they have.
Yeah. Basically, having a safety culture. We always talk about a culture of compliance. I think
Yeah.
I recently did an episode around security. We talked about having that culture of honesty.
Yep.
So there's all types of cultures within the workforce culture in general. But I think that safety culture is really
Yep.
important. And also, I just want to stress like what we cover today. We might not be able to go into everything. We could probably do another 10
Oh God.
episodes diving into OSHA or getting
Just
into the details for every facility type. And so
yeah.
we're going to be very general today. We can always, if there's a
Drill
big
down.
interest, we could always come back and do a different episode at another time around a really specific topic. So I would like the listeners to know we might not cover everything today. My first question is like, why do you think worker safety is often overlooked in the cannabis industry? Because it doesn't seem like when you and I started, we're like dinosaurs because they were talking about it when we were working in these facilities. And even now, it doesn't seem like it's, other
Yeah.
than if people get injured or there's a death and it hits the press and it gets polarized and people are talking about it. But then it seems like now that's calmed down. Nobody's really talking about it again.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. I think there's a general kind of, I think it's a misunderstanding that safety and productivity, you're either productive or you have a lot of safety. But a lot of people think there's a lot of red tape and safety, and then it slows down production, when in fact it actually increases production for a lot of reasons, morale being one of the main ones. And when an employee feels that their business cares for them, they want to go into work and work harder. So there's that, and there's a lot of other reasons why a good safety program actually increases profitability. I think that's probably one of the major reasons. Is, oh, do I need to have a safety? Do what,
Yeah.
what? How much is it going to cost? And they don't think of what the cost is for not having it, right? They just think, oh, what's the upfront cost? And that's one of the major, I think, reasons. But the other one, I think you and I have talked about, and it happens all the time, is a lot of people aren't aware that the federal OSHA standards apply to the cannabis industry. A lot of people think, oh yeah, it's federal
It's a myth.
agency.
They
And
think it's
yeah,
a
and OSHA can't come into my facility. And I'm thinking, oh, they already have come into these facilities and they're already writing violations. And I think just because of the federal confusion, you add that layer to it, people just don't know. And they don't
yeah.
plan for it. They don't plan. When they get their license, they're looking at the state application and state rules, and they forget the federal rules still. And I've said this before, when I was working in my facility, I had a whole lot of the police. I had the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for a non-related crime outside the facility. I had a whole lot of agents and agencies come to my facility, but the two federal ones came in were OSHA and the IRS. Both of those federal agencies will come into your facility and act like they're not witnessing a federal crime, and they will just go
Yeah.
about their business like you have to follow their rules, which you do. Spoiler alert. If anybody's listening and not aware, yeah,
Yeah.
these rules apply to you.
I would also like to say that OSHA has recently come into Colorado. To give an example, this is something I've been saying, I don't know, probably for the last 6 or 7 years, that OSHA coming into these state regulated facilities is definitely not a myth. It is actually happening. It's happening in Colorado now. Last year, they announced, I think it was July last year, that they would be coming to Colorado. They created a educational program here where they're going to spend the next 5 years going into every commercial cultivation facility, every commercial manufacturing facility that's licensed and that produces marijuana. And they're also going to be going into all the hemp facilities that are licensed and produce hemp products. The only facilities they will not be going into are dispensaries.
Hmm.
Those are the only ones they're not going into. And so since last summer, they have been doing, and that's all you get to know. And you don't know when they're coming. And they're recommending people work with companies to these OSHA compliance audits. And what I'm hearing, I've been attending meetings, is that so far there has not been a single facility without a violation.
Yeah,
So I want to put this out there because for anyone who's listening in another state who does not think OSHA's not coming to your state, they always like to try things in Colorado first, where it seemed to always be in the beta or the test pilot or
yeah,
for this. And OSHA has been collecting information for a long time in the cannabis industry. They have a lot of case studies out there with employees getting sick or employee deaths and injuries. They've been collecting data for a long time. And places like Missouri, they're going to start coming into if they're not already in there. We know they're involved, obviously, in Michigan, but some of these new markets like New Jersey or Minnesota, some of these southern states and these Midwestern states, be prepared for worker safety. Brings me to my next question is what are some of the most preventable hazards or injuries?
yeah. And
It's
that's a
really
great
easy,
question.
like, yeah, really easy to prevent.
Yeah, and I just want to go back just a little bit because
Sure.
what you're saying is right. Is that the OSHA and those federal standards are applied to every state? There are about half of the states, 24, 26, as I forget which one, but right around half the states actually have their own state plan, right? So in Michigan, they got MIOSH. In California, they have Cal OSHA. So different states, they have their own. Arizona has whatever AZ, whatever it is. They have their own acronyms, but they're playing the same rules, right? It's the same federal standards. And when they have a state plan, it almost exclusively means they have additional standards, right? So on top of the federal standards, you have additional standards. Like in California, they have additional ergonomic standards. Yeah, to your point is exactly right. These standards are applied everywhere, but they might be enforced by a different agency. To that question, there's a lot of unique hazards. It falls in general industry. So OSHA has different categories of industries. This one is a general industry. There's other more hazardous industries that have their own special rules for them. So you find a lot of like general industry injuries, like slips, trips, and falls, right? Those are very classic in every kind
Yeah.
of industry. But some of the ones that are the most unique are actually some of the most common ones. And what you find in some of the data that's coming out from worker comp insurers is that there's a lot of sprains and around the hand. And that's not a surprise in the wrist. It's repetitive motions, right? So repetitive motions are probably the most unique and honestly long-term hazard that a general employee will face, especially trimmers and people work pruning the plant, those in the cultivation. And that's usually the entry kind of level job, right? You get in as a harvest team or as a grower that trims and prunes a lot. And those repetitive motions, it can come at you real fast. They build over time, and these things can be lifelong debilitating injuries. So that's one of the big ones that's out there. There's a unique one that I think a lot of people have heard of. It was the first with two deaths in this industry were attributed by cannabis dust. And there's a lot of study that they need to figure out what it was. But what happens is this plant is actually technically a sensitizer. So it's actually to some people an allergen, right? So a sensitizer is just like an allergen, but it can build over time. The sensitivity can build, and it starts with like itchy skin, turns into like itchy sore throat that turns into anaphylaxis. And
Yeah.
that's what's actually happened. The big headline deaths in this industry were from that. Those 2 actually are interesting because they both fall under the general duty clause, right? Because you can't, like I mentioned before, California has ergonomic standards, but ergonomic standards are unique. They're really hard to enforce. But one of the biggest ways that for both of those injuries to control those is to educate your employees on what those symptoms are, what the repetitive motion symptoms, soreness, stiffness, limited in range on your hands, all those types of symptoms. You want to tell your employees, hey, these are the symptoms, and come tell us as soon as possible. One, get you into a job rotation, get you out of that repetitive motion or that dusty area, and potentially place you in a better role if necessary. But they found that early reporting of these symptoms is the best way to control that. And
Yeah.
it comes back to the culture, right? The employees need to know that coming forward with these injuries and these symptoms, they're not going to get retaliated against. There
Yeah.
needs to be an openness that they feel comfortable with. I do want to make a point too that those same types of people that have those hazards, the repetitive motions and dust, these are usually young people. Sometimes they're immigrants and English is a second language. And sometimes they're people that come from the black market. And so they don't have the understanding of what their rights as an employee is. They don't understand the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970
Yeah.
and that they have a right to a safe workplace. And these people also tend to not go to authority when there's a problem for multiple
Hmm.
reasons. So my big concern is there's an underreporting of these.
There is an underreporting because I think as an employee, people are afraid of losing their job.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's when I come into a business is one of the most important things. Again, like there needs to be this one education and trust and communication. Those are the real fundamentals of a successful worker program.
Speaking of the worker program, we're going to dive into
Cool.
the core of a cannabis safety program. So what should a foundational workplace safety plan look like in a cannabis facility?
I like to
Yeah,
think of the
obviously.
safety program consists of smaller plans and maybe a program or two in there, right? So plan and program get thrown out
Yeah.
interchangeably. But within that safety program, one of the biggest OSHA violations when they come in is hazard communication plan. And it's so important. What it is essentially, you are documenting all the chemicals that are coming in. You have a current chemical list and you keep all their safety data sheets. They used to be called material safety data sheets, SDSs or MSDS. And you keep all of that information in a binder, and all employees need to have access to that, and they need to be trained. And essentially, it's just reading the labels of every chemical, right? How to use it. That chemical label will tell you how to use it legally. If you use any chemical outside how that label says to use it, it's illegal unless it's less concentration, less frequently. Like that's the
Yeah.
only thing you can do different from what the label says to do. So basically that's the hazard communication plan is everybody understand how to use these chemicals safely and properly and stored properly and etc. And what to do if the chemical comes in contact with you in your eyes. Some will say induce vomiting. Others will say don't induce vomiting, right? So if you ingest the chemical. So you need to understand before something goes wrong. So that's the essence of the hazard communication plan. The other big one that OSHA looks for, and people call this different things, but OSHA calls it the emergency action plan. And that's basically like a fire drill. So
Yeah.
you need to know exit routes. Employees need to know how to get out. They also need to know location of where everybody's going to meet up in the parking lot. And the other unique thing that you need to have, somebody needs to be responsible for head count.
Yeah. Who's
Every,
counting?
but at every day, somebody needs to know who's on site, right? So if a fire happens, you can have an official head count. Security guard, people checking people in and out of the facility. Those are the type of people that need to be responsible for that.
And I would like to add too for
Yeah.
dispensaries, don't forget your customers. If there's an emergency and you have customers in your facility, your
Mm.
employees, are you counting the heads of the customers that were
Yeah.
in your lobby or in your dispensing room? A lot of
Hmm.
people don't think about that because most of these facilities are not public facing, other than the retail stores or the medical
Yep.
centers.
No, great point. And there's additional things in this emergency action plan that you can include, right? Not it's not required by law, but good things like what happens when an active shooter comes in. Do you hunker down? Do you get out? Same thing with what happens if there's a robbery, right? So you can add these emergency action plans to all these different scenarios, even the natural disasters in your area. What happens when a hurricane, tornado, tidal wave, whatever exactly. What do you do in those scenarios? That's a really important plan to have as well. Another one that you need to have that almost nobody has too is this fire prevention plan. And this can be really simple. Of course, this includes maintenance and use of your fire extinguishers and your fire suppression systems. So maintaining all of those equipment so they're certified and tested properly. But what it also does is maintain your flammable and combustible material properly. So a lot of people will store up cardboard and they'll just throw it in the back, right? And there's that space heater back there as well, right? So it's keeping the flammable and combustible material, that supply and that inventory as low and little as possible. So you're throwing out the cardboard at a regular rate so it doesn't pile up, or you're storing the flammable liquid in the proper cabinet, and you're keeping ignition sources away from that material, right? It's pretty simple, but it is something that you should document and train all employees on. So there's the fire prevention
Yeah.
plan.
I would like to dive that fire rated cabinet. I have been in facilities where I've seen jugs of isopropyl,
Oh gosh,
you
yeah.
know, next to non-fire rated cabinets where people had pesticides in non-fire rated cabinets. I've seen people's PPE, their masks, which
Mm.
that are pulling in air that aren't bad, and they're just shoved in cabinets. You won't believe the amount of fire hazards I see in some of these cultivation and manufacturing facility. I'm not
Yeah.
saying everybody's doing a horrible job, but I have seen some wild stuff. And I think too, the next one, if you could talk about the respiratory
Protection.
protection program,
Yeah.
because this is the number one violation in
Oh
Colorado right
God, it
now.
makes sense. It makes
And
sense.
yeah,
Yep.
the name of that OSHA program in Colorado, in case anybody wants to look it up, it's the local emphasis program for cannabis industries. And that's what they launched in Colorado on July 18th, 2024. So you can look up that program and see what they're doing in Colorado. But the number one violation that I'm hearing is the respiratory protection program and the lack of people not having anything in place.
Yeah, no, that was the next program I was gonna go into, and
I knew you were going there.
this is the most complex, confusing one. There's some complexity to it, and the interesting thing here too is one of the other safety standards that everybody needs to be aware of, federal, it's an EPA federal standard, it's called the Worker Protection Standard. This protects employees from pesticide exposure. So anybody that works in a cultivation around the plants needs this type of training, and you need a central location, meaning there's a place with all the posters and warnings and the pesticide application and places to clean up and control spills. If the chemical label says you must have a respirator, you have to wear a respirator for that pesticide application. And so the worker protection standard requires businesses to have a respiratory protection program. For a while, it was unique to worker protection standard. Now they just basically defer and say, follow OSHA's program. So
Hmm.
this impacts multiple federal standards, and you can have violations like in multiple ways if you don't do this. So the respiratory protection program, if you use any type of respirator, you need one, right? So there's two types of respirator use from OSHA's view. There's voluntary and mandatory. So if it's on the label, this is mandatory. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to wear it, and they'll tell you a type of gas mask. It'll be either half mask, full mask. It'll be a vapor cartridge, but it'll tell you exactly this is the type of respirator that you have to use. And so if it's mandatory, you need a full respirator program. And it's a definitely a decent sized document. And what it does, respirator selection, like how do you select the right respirator? There's storage, maintenance, use. You have to track the cartridges have different lifespans, right? So you have to track the cartridges use in specific use logs, cartridge logs, whatever you want to call it. And so basically, and the big part of that too, it is you have to get a fit test
Yeah.
and a medical evaluation, right? Because somebody with a lung condition or a heart condition, it makes your breathing harder, right? When you're wearing a respirator. So you have to have a medical evaluation. Now, that's the full respiratory protection program. If it's voluntary, it's different, right? If this is, and this is where most people get confused, and I'm probably going to upset some people talking about this because everybody knows after COVID what an N95 is, right? Those little dust masks. That is technically a respirator. If you're wearing one of those masks and you're not required even to wear it, but you're wearing it for protection, for additional protection, you have to have a respirator protection program, even with just the N95s. That's probably why they get most of the violations because OSHA's, oh, I see your N95 hanging. Show me your respiratory protection program. And everybody's going to be like, what?
SOPs. They don't have the
Yeah, they
SOPs.
don't have the SOP.
They don't have the
Exactly.
SOP.
Of course. Yeah. It's classic. But in that, you don't necessarily need the medical evaluation or fit test. You need to do everything else. It needs to be written. It needs to be, the employees need to be trained and all those other things. I still know businesses that do the fit test and the medical evaluation you can do online. The 3M has one
Mm.
that's free and pretty easy. There's the fit test you can do manually as well. There's different kinds. There's two types. There's one where you can actually quantitate the fit, where it's like measuring the pressures, but then there's the qualitative one where like you burn this stick. It's like a saccharin stick,
Oh,
and it's sugar. You burn the sugar basically around your face. And if you can taste sugar inside the respirator, then it's obviously you don't have a good fit. And also too, if it's mandatory, you can't have a facial hair that
yeah.
interferes with that fit.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. It gets pretty complex. Like I said, the nuances between voluntary and mandatory, most people are confused by. The fact is that if you're using any respirator, you need this program. And it gives administrate again, all these plans and these safety programs, you got to have an administrator or somebody in charge, right? Which means you should have a safety guy, or you should have at least one safety guy or a safety committee, which I recommend, right? Somebody from each
Yeah.
department, and one of those people should be the program administrator or in charge of those plans.
And then so my other question, because I have on here too, another area is the written
Tell me.
safety and health program. And so, what are some of the rules? What if I'm a small operator? What if I have under 10 employees? How does that work?
So, the interesting thing is like OSHA, it's funny, is after one employee, now OSHA doesn't apply to you if you have one employee or less. So if it's just
Okay.
you and one other person, OSHA's not going to knock on your door. There are some rules and standards for the written for 10 employees or less. And
Yeah.
I can't remember all of them, but some of those plans can just be orally trained. You don't need to document it. It's still just good to have it, but there is less enforcement from OSHA when you're 10 or less. So the
Yeah.
smaller businesses, and this is the thing too, OSHA, they are responsive. This is the thing, like mostly they are responsive, right? So they're not proactive. They do have great support. People do come to them, and OSHA, they have these free outreach programs that OSHA can give you some guidance on. But for the most part, they're a responsive agency. And so they respond to injuries and they respond to people calling for different issues. A lot of times they understand sometimes this is employee retaliation, etc. Unless it's like a real serious violation or injury, they usually really want to work with you. I've found from my experience, they tend to want to work with you and they don't want to be nitpicky. But if there is a serious violation, somebody seriously got hurt, they're going to come in and they're going to lay that hammer down. And
Yeah.
there's some serious violations too. I don't think we went over it, and it keeps going up every year. With
They
they
do go
have
up. Yeah, they go up every year. They actually, I believe they put out a press release around it,
Yeah,
don't they?
it's
Every
every year, and you can go find it, but it changes with inflation. So there's these, it's not
yeah.
completely round numbers, but it's somewhere around like 14, $15,000 for the first. And then if you have multiple or willful, so if they think you did this on purpose and they say this is a neglect thing that you should have had and didn't, you can get 150, 140,
Yeah.
150,000. It's a serious, for small businesses, many can't handle that type of violation.
Even a small MSO meaning multi-state operator, there are people who are just in two states, right? So if you're in two states or three states and you get an OSHA violation, let's say New Jersey, and then they come into your Colorado location and find that you have a violation, they will add all the violations together and count that not as a first violation in your Colorado facility, but as a second violation as a whole across the United States. They add them together.
Mhm.
Something that you have to be careful about if you are a multi state operator, small, medium, or large, there's all kinds of sizes that they will count them against you in every state. It's not like you get to start over in a new state. And also, I just one other thing, and then we're going to move on to the next section. Lockout, tag out was
Oh
another
yeah,
one.
that's an important one. Most businesses really aren't aware of this, and this applies to every facility type. And basically, your electrical panel, if you have an electrician that comes in and you have a piece of equipment that they can't unplug and work on, if it's like it's a hard lined big piece of equipment, trimmer, etc., and they're working on it, they have to go to the electrical panel to cut that out. And so what lockout tag out is more than just electricity. There's also like potential energy. So like hydraulics and things that can release energy. You're supposed you lock it out, right? And each type of device has its own type of lockout device, right? So electrical panels have their own specific lockout. So you flip the electrical switch off and then you can lock it shut. And
Mhm.
what the lockout tag out program mean, there's authorized employees and affected employees. So the authorized employees are the ones working on the equipment and they have the keys to the lockout tag out equipment. And then there's affected employees, and the affected employees are just people walking around and that aren't working on that equipment. And what they need to know is if you see this type of lockout, tag out stuff, leave it alone. Just don't touch it.
Yeah.
And the point is to prevent electrocution and death by release of
Yeah.
energy that could have been controlled.
Yeah, I want to jump into like kind of fire and electrical safety essentials. And
Yeah.
really, I actually wanted to bring up some examples, some overlooked fire hazards specific to cannabis operations. So, Alex and I, we have experienced this on a project. And I'll give an example is that when you're building these cultivation facilities, a lot of times people don't think about the rooms that they're storing things in or where is the product going to go once you've harvested, dried, and cured it and now it's sitting in buckets waiting. If we use metric, for example, it's going to go from a plant tag and moving over to a package tag and then ready for wholesale? Where are you storing all the product that's going to be ready to sell for wholesale once it's past testing? And so Alex and I have been in a couple projects where we were in these grow facilities where these rooms, you couldn't even move through
Oh
them.
God.
And so the employees, they were working out of these rooms in laptops, and the desks were overwhelmed with cannabis product and turkey bags and boxes and big black bins and things just sitting there waiting to get tested. And in these small rooms, and there's no good air ventilation, and they're breathing in cannabis dust, and it's a total fire hazard. There's things everywhere. And also, I've been in facilities where there's lots of cardboard and these igniters that Alex was talking about. So I just, something to think about. A lot of times people buy existing buildings,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And some of these places are in these cities where they're buying these old buildings and they're retrofitting them and they're cramming all this stuff in and they don't have a lot of space. So you just want to think about those things. And
Yeah.
is there a clear path? Is everything well organized? Do you have fire rated like pesticide for chemicals, and are your chemicals separated and nothing's really, there's no contamination, there's no sparks that are going to light chemicals on fire? And then the rooms that the employees are in, are they overcrowded? We won't get into the crazy details, but Alex and I, we have seen some crazy things out there, haven't we,
Oh
Alex?
yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's so many different types of fire, and you're right. It's like, what type of facility is it? Like, how's it built? What's the material? Yeah, ignition sources, and the ones we've seen. Yeah, like I said, the office material too.
Paper.
Build up a paper. Goes back to that fire prevention plan. You don't build up paper and have cardboard and paper stacking high. You get rid of it when you don't need it. It's good sanitation and hygiene principles. Basically, throw out the trash, don't build up trash, keep things that spark away from things that catch on fire and go boom. A lot of basic stuff, but there are some unique fire hazards in this industry as well, and some of the biggest claims are coming actually from cultivations and light bulbs popping and catching on fire. That is actually a fairly common thing. It's obviously the older kind of a lighting equipment, the high pressure sodium and metal halides. They versus the LED, right? A lot of people think the LEDs are safer, but they go bad too, and they spark and they can catch on fire. But really, what's important here too, because this is so important, because it is one of the biggest claims. And what happens is, like, complete grow rooms will go down; they'll catch on fire, and the parts of the rooms that don't will be contaminated by the smoke. So businesses are losing massive harvests because of this. And really, what's important, especially because one of the most important insurance coverages to get that a lot of people don't, and it scares me that they don't have it, is called business interruption and equipment breakdown. The equipment breakdown, it is one of the biggest losses. Like I said, that's what you would be get covered under. And one, get that coverage. Always get the equipment breakdown, especially if you're cultivation or a manufacturer. And what's really important to have is an equipment maintenance program, right? So
Oh,
define,
absolutely.
you have a list of all your equipment, you have scheduled maintenance, scheduled cleaning. If things go wrong and there is a fire because of one of those pieces of equipment, you'll be covered in that case.
Those are really good points. And it's just something to think about. And for those that are listening, to think about your fire hazards and also making sure you have the proper insurance if something were to happen. And the
Mhm.
next thing I wanted to tackle, because this can be such a confusing area for people, is the OSHA compliance and the record keeping section, right? So the OSHA 300 logs and the
Oh yeah, the
301
one.
incident report and the 300, the posting requirements around that.
Yes. No, that's a big one. And a lot of times this is like an HR thing. It can be done by the safety team, but a lot of times HR is involved because a lot of times
Yeah.
payroll is attached to the worker comp insurance. So this usually falls in the HR department, but it is really important. There's multiple ways to do it. Again, I always get them backwards, the 300, 301. But I think it's the 300 that you report, or is it two?
301 is
Okay,
reporting,
so
and then
yeah,
the
yeah, so
300 is logs, and then
30, yeah.
the 300A is just the posting requirements around.
So the 301, that has to be done within 24 hours of the injury. So if somebody goes to it, if an injury happens on site, and if you can just wrap a bandage around it, you don't need to report it, right? But if somebody goes to an emergency room, goes seeks gets medical attention, that formally becomes a reportable incident. And so within 24 hours, you have to report that. There is old school paper. You can email it to OSHA. There's also digital ways you can do that to make it simpler. But then, yeah, every year you have to post what all of the injuries in conspicuous places. So every employee has to be aware of all the injuries, including death, that have happened at the facility over the past year. And that's at the
Would
beginning of the year. It's like it's 2 or 3 months. You have to post it. What is it? It's like February to April or something, but it's very clear on how you have to report that. So, yeah.
I go into facilities and I'll see a sign that says, "Oh, it's been 125 days since our."
That's a little different. That's like,
I
because
know.
remember,
I'm just having fun that out
no,
there.
you could have that next to it. That would be funny. No,
Yeah,
but
I always see those.
if
I've seen them more in like the manufacturing side. They have OSHA reporting centers that
there's
you can
multiple
buy
ways.
them.
Yeah.
You can buy them on Amazon or somebody who provides that information. But I've seen these centers that come with the whole reporting center and the signs and the logs and the binder, and it just attaches to the wall, similar to an SDS. I've seen they you can go online and buy these SDS centers,
Yeah.
and that you can post. And it's true, there are some HR payroll companies or someone who does all your insurance and payroll all bundled into the one. The workman's comp will handle these reports, but not everybody. Some people might be doing their own payroll. I want to talk about like employee engagement and safety. So we have things like safety meetings, job hazard training, like you mentioned earlier about SDS access and PPE usage and hygiene protocols. How do you get employees to take ownership of the workplace safety? What are some things they can do?
That's a great question. And I don't think there's a simple answer, but it comes back to the culture, right? And it comes back to the ownership, creating an environment of open dialogue, right? And encouraging employees to speak up. And also to take ownership. When I talk with employees, is we're all in this together. If you see a tripping hazard, like a cord, pick it up, fix the situation. And when it's more of like the team idea, we're all in this together. You don't need to make like a hyper competitive work environment. It should be collaborative. We should be looking out for each other. And I think when the employees know that the employers care about their safety, the employees tend to reciprocate. The employees tend to say, you know what, I'm going to look out for myself and others as well. And so I think it's the culture, having them included, having the dialogue open, having that really foundation of trust is the most important.
Yeah, and also too, if you can remember any feedback that you might have received from previous employees, were they happy that they had the training? Were they happy to know that information? Do you think they appreciated it more than nobody talking to them about anything?
I think so. Of course, some of this is monotonous, and especially as the years go on, and there's even the joke in the industry. I don't know. Safety meaning means something different to a lot of cannabis employees. Safety meaning
Yeah.
usually means to go
Safety meeting.
smoke some
Let's
whatever,
go to
whatever.
safety meeting.
It's right. Safety meaning again, it's not as common as it should be in the industry, right? And I've found real positive response. Of course, you get into some of this monotonous stuff. Sometimes the engagement you would want more, but for the on the whole, I do get really positive response, and you get
Yeah.
great questions. People want to know why. The way that I go about this is it's a lot of the why, right? Not just what? Here are the rules. You must do this. You shall do that. Nobody likes to be talked to like that. But when they understand the why behind it, and that is the thing about OSHA standards, to be honest with you, like those are written in blood. Now, almost every single rule and standard is written from a
Yeah.
serious injury or a death. And so these rules are there for a reason. I know some people think OSHA can be a little nitpicky and over the top and burdensome, but I'm really proud that we live in a country where it is a right of a worker to have a safe workplace. And I think when you have these employees and you teach them, hey, we have these set programs and rules in place and we have to follow these standards because it's about coming home the same way you went into work
Yeah.
that day with the same amount of eyes and fingers and legs. And when the employees know the business cares and these rules are here to protect me and everybody else. I'm actually surprised by the enthusiasm and engagement. You get real
Yeah.
positive because again, what this is about, even though some of the topics can be boring or dull, it's about it's about caring for people, and I think just people in general. You feel cared for, and I think because of that, you get positive engagement in
Yeah, look,
response.
I used to train employees on food safety, and let me tell you, that's some pretty boring and dull stuff. And to try to sit there and talk about cross contamination and keep people interested in listening to you and have employees engaged. But at the end of the day, I always found that they were so grateful, even though
Mhm.
they might already know the information, they've always been so grateful that their employers spent the time to bring people in, to work with their team, to do additional training, to answer people's questions. I feel like they'd rather have that than nobody talk to
Yeah.
them at all about anything, and that they're just this number and they're just
Mhm.
pushing out a product and that nobody cares. So I really think it's something to think about if you're an operator,
Yeah.
when you're designing all these different programs and systems for your facilities. So wrapping up, wanted to talk hazard prevention and any kind of like last minute parting words, what other things maybe that we didn't cover that can be really good with preventing some of these hazards that we're seeing in places.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. A lot is being prepared, right? Having the right safety programs in place, the right education, training, employee engagement, all the things we're talking about, creating that culture. But one of the big things that I found too that is very telling is just like the general housekeeping, right? If I go into a facility and it's immaculate, that is a real positive sign to me that, hey, this company probably is buttoned up. They probably know what they're doing. They probably are looking out for safety and employees. It's because, again, it's slip, trips, and falls, right? That is general industry, probably, if my recollection is right, is the most common injury across the board. So, just having that, just having your facility in order is a great first step. Not having chaos, having documented these safety programs is another big
Please.
piece. It is communication. It really is.
Yeah.
Employees, hey, going to their manager and trusting, hey, I noticed whatever, some open bottles of pesticide or whatever. I closed it up. Or what awareness, what's going on, and everybody taking accountability. And that's
Yeah.
where the culture was working when everybody's accountable. And that's probably the biggest thing is just give the employees the education and the tools and hold them accountable. And you'll be surprised how well they respond to that. Employees, I think, thrive under those types of conditions. And
I love
yeah.
that. Oh, that's awesome. You're speaking my language. And what I was going to say, here's the thing. Employees like structure.
Oh, oh my God.
News
Yes.
alert! Employees
Yes.
like structure. You
Yes.
have a facility with no structure,
Oh my
no
God. Yeah.
systems. It is going to be a total disaster and chaotic work environment. They like structure. They thrive
Yes.
when they know their role, when they know their responsibility, when they know all the hazards and everything is communicated clearly to them, and they know that the company that they're working for cares about them, they will thrive.
Yeah.
It's
Agreed.
so true.
100%.
And another thing too is we joke a lot about SOPs and saying because when these regulated states come online, they have a list of SOPs. They say, here are all the SOPs that you need for your dispensary or your testing lab or your manufacturing facility or your cultivation or your transport or delivery company. But they don't ever say, here are all the SOPs that you need to have for OSHA. And
Yeah.
so that's why we laugh about it because not a lot of people realize that there's all these different plans and SOPs and whatnot that a lot of employees don't even know exist or they've never even seen one or they haven't been trained on it. And those are the SOPs we're talking about. We're not talking about the SOPs that you were already mandated to create in order to win your license or be operational. You brought up some good points. Also, too, I would say proper chemical storage and disposal is some good hazard prevention because people get stuff in their eyes or there's all kinds of chemical or particle hazards. I want to say in closing So if you're an operator and you're listening today, I have 3 actions for you. One, that you can audit your written safety plan. You can walk the floor of your facility and look for obvious safety red flags, and then also schedule your next safety meeting with your staff. And this might be a little hard to chew on if you're a dispensary because it's a little bit different, but if you're a manufacturing facility or cultivation facility, you can definitely implement some of these standards. Anything else that you want to add, Alex?
No, I think we covered it. Again, it comes back to the culture. It comes down to trust. When employees trust their work environment and their employers, you'll get the best out of them. I think everything else you said, yeah, is all great advice.
Yeah. That was a really good episode. I had a lot of fun with that, and, I feel like we could have a worker protection standard episode. There's
Oh
all
yeah.
different
Cannabis
talk
dust, ergonomics, we could go on. Yeah, a whole lot of
chemical
subjects. Yeah.
storage, all kinds of crazy stuff that we could dive deep into, and maybe that's something that Alex and I will work on in the future. So I just want to thank all of the listeners today for joining Alex and myself. We really appreciate everyone who's listening, and hopefully this helps some operators out there. You can find this podcast if you like watching videos. You can visit my YouTube channel, Under the Microscope with Jenny. Also, if you like to stream and listen on an app, we're pretty much on all the apps out there, from Spotify to Apple to Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and Pandora Radio. And so, thanks again for tuning in to another episode on Under the Microscope. And thank you to our awesome and amazing guest, Alex Herding, for coming on a second time.
Oh, anytime. Looking forward to the next one.
All
Thanks,
right.
Jenny.
Thanks, Alex.